Well, we worked on it for 7 years, a little bit like this one, my most recent one also. We thought that financial crises were a bigger problem, a more recurrent problem than people thought. And one of the early insights we had is they've been going on forever. So Spain had been defaulting in the 1500s.
Right.
The UK defaulted in 1340. People just think, it never happened before. It's been going on. But I think the thing that we did that was original in that book was most of the earlier books are the Treasury Secretary or the finance minister was so depressed at midnight when they saw they couldn't pay the debt and they called home. And our book had numbers. We put together numbers in a way nobody had ever done before and allowed you to look at the footprints. How does it unfold? What do you look for? And, when the book came out in the early papers, we were mocked because the New York Times had a 2-page spread saying, well, some people think it's going to be bad, but these people, it's just ridiculous. They think it's going to be going on and it's going to have to go on for a long time. But, our benchmark numbers were pretty useful. And one big point we had was that if you have a financial crisis, not like a typical recession, it's a slow recovery. It takes years.
Which is how it played out here.
Which is, absolutely how it played out here and almost everywhere. Most recessions, they're terrible, but you actually bounce back pretty fast. And within a year, you're doing better than when you started. I mean, even if we have a recession now, that's a good guess of how it'll look. But if you have a financial crisis, it's much more crippling and lasts much longer.
I think what you did with that book was you used numbers to demonstrate how debt either puts you into a financial crisis or exacerbates it once you're in it. And that's why those recoveries are U-shaped and not V-shaped.
Well, I think what it is that our societies don't really have an ambiguous feeling about debt. Yeah. So we don't just suddenly, like in the old days, the British would put people in debtors' jails or worse.
Go to a workhouse.
Nowadays is, well, let's go to court and let's go to court again.
Yeah.
And that's a large part of why it takes so long to play out. They happen in every society. That was a really interesting thing, that they're similar in a very autocratic regime, in a regime with a French-style legal system, which is different, the historical circumstances. So that was a stunning finding that we had. So we know English is used everywhere. We're just so privileged if you live in the United States, or some of your listeners weren't born in the United States. It's just such a privilege to have English as the language. And if you have somebody, from one developing country and somebody from another developing country, chances are they're going to speak English. In the European Union, you know what the working language is? English. It's not French. It's not German. And a little bit the dollar plays that role. And it's an incredible benefit to us in a lot of ways. One of the ways is we absolutely pay lower interest rates, not just Uncle Sam, but if you have a mortgage, a car loan, it's lower because the world is eating up those dollars. They're being absorbed partly into the rest of the world. It's a very liquid market. So that's one thing we have. There are other things we could go on to. But no, it's not a given. So doesn't change very often, the dominant currency. Before us, it was Britain. It was the UK. From the Napoleonic Wars up even after World War I, when they got really hit hard compared to us, they were still co-equal with us. It was only after World War I and World War II, that they lost it. And before them, there were the Dutch. Before the Dutch, the Spanish. There, even in those history you give, there was a while where the Spanish pieces of aid were still floating around. They were used in a lot of the world. It doesn't change very quickly.
Shared the stage with the guilder.
Yeah, they shared the stage with the guilder. Right. They shared the stage with the guilder, and even for a while with the pound. That people still loved the Spanish pieces of aid. They didn't have the financial depth. I think the problem. So first of all, going back just 20 years, everyone thought the euro would do better.
I remember.
They thought the euro would reach par. Europe was the same size as the United States. Hard to believe these days. I mean, we have just killed it while they've been very
In the
slow.
year 2000, the United States and the continent of Europe had roughly equivalent GDP.
Exactly. And the stock markets were about the same, believe it or not. Yeah. Nobody knew. And it kind of looked like, they had advantages and disadvantages. They designed their central bank very cleverly, even compared to ours. So, but, then they had this debt crisis around the time of our book in 2010, 2012. And that really shook confidence. So you can point at reasons that they don't have one country. Everybody loves the German bonds. They really like the Italian bonds so much. The French bonds are in between. You can point at these things. But I think had the Euro crisis not happened, and if they hadn't invited Greece in, they probably wouldn't have happened. They'd have a bigger footprint. They're still 20% of the global economy that they've got. Europe's still pretty big, but they haven't expanded in the way they're not used in Latin America. They're not used in Asia. They're used, but just not the same.
Well, part of the thing is that they found themselves in a fiscal straitjacket of their own making. They were not able to respond as quickly as the United States was, putting aside the central bank. The fiscal stimulus that we did here, I think, enabled us to do a quicker end run to get out of the crisis than Europe could have politically.
Well, yeah, but I mean, the problems, Germany wasn't in a crisis. Greece was in a crisis. Italy was in a crisis. Portugal was in a crisis.
Well,
so fiscal stimulus would have had to give a lot of money to the South, and they gave a lot of it anyway.
Okay.
The other thing I would say about Europe that's people underestimate the importance of is they're not a geopolitical power. They sort of hide behind the United States and have let us spend a ton of money every year. President Trump is right about that. Actually, previous presidents said the same thing, but in a sort of less aggressive way than he has. But we were spending, when the Cold War ended, 7% of GDP. At the end of the 1980s, 7% of GDP. Imagine that. It's down to 3%. And cumulatively, you spent a lot. But on the other hand, they're not a geopolitical power. And that matters if you want to be the main currency in a lot of ways. Like, okay, an obvious thing is it's harder to invade you.
When you say geopolitical power, military
power.
All right.
Yeah, it's harder to invade.
Is it ironic then that one of the consequences of this current presidential term for Trump is that the Germans are now openly talking about rearming and possibly becoming military power?
It's going to help It's going to help the euro. I actually say that in the book. I mean, I didn't know what would happen, but I say that if they ever built up as a military power, they're going to expand. The other reason's a little more subtle, and again, you can kind of Trump says it really bluntly, but there's all sorts of deals that go on in the global economy about how the IMF works, how the different banking systems work, how are they connected. And we kind of get our way in every deal. Part of it's we're big, but it's also a subtle subtext is, we're not going to defend you if you don't do what we want. Trump actually says that, but you go back to Nixon, you go back to Ronald Reagan, you go back to other presidents. It was there in the negotiation, and Nixon recorded it. Yeah. So your listeners can go back and listen to the Watergate tapes where he's just chewing out the Fed chair. It was Arthur Burns. You go do this. And Arthur Burns printed money like crazy. He was scared of Nixon.
The Democrats too, LBJ had a view on...
Absolutely.
He confronted Martin
Absolutely.
About where rates were. Okay, so I'm not saying that makes it less scary than the constitutional crisis that could arise.
It's nothing new.
Right, okay. All right, but it's the same thing with the dollar. So Trump says things out loud like NATO doesn't pay its fair share, rather than try to glad hand people behind closed doors, which is probably the Clinton approach.
Hasn't really worked.
The Obama hasn't worked.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know that this will work, but maybe people don't actually make drastic change until they're really threatened. And I think they feel threatened that they're in between a United States that's less interested in defending all of these countries and Russia, which is as aggressive or more aggressive than it's been in a long time.
I haven't had to use a lawyer really, but what I read is, sometimes you want a lawyer who's an SOB representing you. Then again, if they turn on you, it's not so great.
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, sometimes you need to bargain very aggressively.
Okay.
No, absolutely. I mean, I didn't really go to high school much in high school and was playing chess all over the place. And you get to talk with people, and they knew everything about America, but they had a lot of complaints about it. I mean, we did have all kinds of problems back then. But yeah, I mean, they love you, but they hate you. And so I think it's very important as an American to understand that. And it's also part of policy. I think some of our presidents haven't traveled much, and I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
It was absolutely true. I mean, when Bobby Fischer was playing in the early 70s, he was on the front page of every newspaper, the big magazines. I would ride in a taxi cab in Spain, and the driver would turn around and go, "Bobby Fischer, loco," because he had a reputation for being really eccentric. And it was actually in the United States, there was certainly an intelligentsia that was interested. PBS had their most watched show following the chess matches.
Yeah.
I didn't tell people in my high school I played chess. I went to a very tough high school.
Right.
I was scared to seem wimpy or something.
Okay.
And it wasn't until I, just was in the newspapers all the time and they found out. But then I'm playing in Yugoslavia, and I go into a bar and they go, "Why did you play so stupid today? I bet on you." And it was just wonderful. I mean, to be accepted that way.
It's a really cool thing that there was this era, and I think kind of video games came along and replaced the interest among young people for chess. I think that's like part of it.
Chess is having a really good period. So
well, now it's having a little bit of a renaissance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it goes through cycles. It's in a good phase now.
Okay, so
I wanted to add one other thing about
please.
that. I mean, I certainly also learned about life because I was making money playing chess. In fact, I didn't earn as much money as an academic till my mid-30s, which is partly saying how little you are as an academic. But I wouldn't feel comfortable going into hotels and spending money. I would sleep in train stations, on park benches and stuff, and learned a lot about life, I think, from having done. Trump is right about many things. I tell my students who think he's wrong about everything, how can he be wrong about everything? You'd have to be a genius. If I gave you a multiple choice test and you missed every question, you must know the answers. Like, he's not wrong about everything.
Right.
I think he's wrong about this. If he just put in
wrong about the problem or wrong about the solution?
Both.
Okay.
So let's start with the problem. On the one hand, people are selling more to us than we're buying from them. That doesn't sound good. But on the other hand, people are putting a lot more money into the United States than we're putting into them. And it's building factories, it's bidding up, the United States has just dominated the world the last 20 years. Okay, we could redistribute income better, we could do some things better, but this has not been a disastrous period. We are the envy of the world. So I would say the problem's not, there are periods, sometimes when you run a trade balance really fast, it's a problem. That happened in the early 2000s. I was writing about it. Alan Greenspan was saying, no problem, everything's good, our financial markets absorb it. And I got to speak after him, on an occasion and disagree with him. Of course, everyone had disappeared by that point when I was speaking. But yeah, I mean, there are times it's wrong. But it's really his solution that's so, nuts. If he just put a tariff on 10%, actually, I would come on and speak to you. No big deal. It's a tax. I don't like taxes. Maybe it's not a perfect tax. But he could cut some other taxes, look at the whole package and say, okay, I wouldn't do it that way, but okay. We have worked on this as economists, trying to quantify how bad it is. It's just not that bad. We're a big country. We don't really import that much. It's 10% tariff, not a bad idea. The problem is this let's make a deal, absolute uncertainty chaos, which for him is part of the object of it, I think.
I think so too.
It creates so much uncertainty, for someone who's an importer, for someone who's investing. He's just wrong on it. We can go in circles about it. But if he would retreat, it would be better.
The chaos serves one very specific aim of his, which is to be the center of attention and to be the person that everyone has to come to and plead with. And I think he's smart from the standpoint of, if that's your goal, he knows how to accomplish that goal. He's got the CEOs of the top companies in every industry, from not just all over America, but all over the world, calling him, taking meetings with him, begging him to see reason or tailor what he's doing specifically so they could have their own loophole. He's got Tim Cook coming to him and saying, here's what I need, please, can I have it? Might not use the word please, but that's the implication.
I couldn't say it better than you said it.
So he likes that.
No, he likes it, but I mean, after a while, at some point you have to deliver results, and the results he's delivering are not good. He says it'll all be better. I think the thing, I just don't really get what's on the other side of this. It could be, I could draw out a map where he just everything we want. But I was just in the UK, and sort of, it hadn't quite dawned on me till it was there. They were putting free speech as free speech. The UK didn't have good enough free speech. It's different than ours. This is the Magna Cartas from the UK, the birth of modern, liberties there. So, I don't. You described it well. I can't. But if he would retreat from this, he would have a lot better 4 years, and so would everyone else.
One of the reasons for the uncertainty is that there is no clear aim. So if you have a trade war and you say, my ultimate goal is for these other countries to drop all tariffs completely, and once that happens, we will do the same, and free trade, and I'm a free trade ideologue, and there should be absolutely no protectionism anywhere, and that's the goal. Okay, probably you don't get it, but at least people understand what the end game might be. When you come out and say there are tariffs until the fentanyl stops crossing the border to one country, and you say to another country, I need your media to give more voice to the right wing, and then you say to a third country, no, this is just about autos, and then a fourth country, we want to sell you steak. People look at this and say, okay, so in other words, the tariff is just the place setter so that when Trump meets with his counterpart in country A, it's just about getting something. It's not about getting to a specific economic deal.
And so let's come to the dollar. That's our Achilles heel here. So when Trump came in, our debt trajectory was already looking pretty shaky. It had looked okay to many people when interest rates were super low, but once interest rates, in my opinion, had normalized more, then suddenly our interest bill was exploding. It's more than doubled in a very short period. And suddenly you can't just think everything's free. And that idea, which was very prevalent, not just on the left and parts of the right, but also in academics, that was a very popular idea. And, a lot of people held it, a lot of smart people. It's looking pretty dubious right now already. That is our Achilles heel, because if the dollar blows up and we run into debt problems and have to inflate, that's going to push people out of the dollar. And then if suddenly people stop liking us as much and add even more interest to that interest going up, that's happened recently.
I want to make sure people understand what you're saying. So effectively, people are willing to take the US dollar as payment in trade and hold the majority of their FX reserves in dollar-denominated assets like treasuries or dollars themselves. They're willing to do that because there's this implicit bargain that in exchange, the Federal Reserve will not allow inflation to inflate away the purchasing power of those dollars. So that's what's under threat. That's what's under threat now. One of the things that's under threat now. We were able to get off the gold standard because people were willing to just take our word for it. We have the most powerful military in the world. We have one of the most dynamic economies, and we promise we won't inflate away the purchasing power of the dollar. And people said, great, I'll hold my assets in dollars.
Let's pause on that.
Okay.
Not right away. I mean, so I'll go to the title of my book, Our Dollar, Your Problem. dollar used to be as good as gold if you were a government. So, the individuals, it was in the early 1930s, you couldn't get gold for your dollars. But if you're a government, you still could. And so the whole world was built on the premise that the dollar was good as gold. But we had the Vietnam War, we had the Great Society, we started having creeping inflation, we started getting challenged by the French and others, started turning in their gold, and Nixon finally said, no more. Dollar's not,
you can no longer bring a dollar to the window and get its equivalent value in gold. Now you just have to go along with us because we say it's good as gold.
Well, or not. I mean,
that's 71?
So that was in 71. And so he sent John Connolly, who was the Treasury Secretary back then, a very larger-than-life Texan. He went back to confront the big leaders from all over the world, Europe, Japan, Canada, and they go, what are we supposed to do? Like, we're holding a ton of dollars, just like the Asian central banks are today. And Connolly said, I'm paraphrasing it slightly, it's our dollar, your problem. And of course, it was our problem because we didn't really have a plan ourselves. Right. And we had all this inflation in the 70s. It was terrible for most Americans. It was a really low growth period. Why the title speaks to me is, first of all, the irony. It was our problem too. We didn't recognize that. And right. You can talk about that with the trade war. It's worse for the United States than anybody.
Right.
And, second, it's something that captures the arrogance of the United States. And I don't want to say I'm very proud to be an American, but sometimes I hear this arrogance which doesn't have a sense of humility, and we make mistakes. And I feel uncomfortable with it. Maybe you don't, I don't know. But that it spoke to me. And so that's why I chose.
It's a very evocative statement to make, because that's not what America is really riding high in that era. To your point, we're about to capitulate in Vietnam, and we've got civil rights issues that are only a year or two in the rearview mirror, if at all, that were ugly in the eyes of a lot of the world. And to sit in front of foreign finance people who were worried that all these dollars they're holding are about to be inflated away, and say it's our dollar, but it's your problem. I think it's a brilliant title for the book.
And it sunk the dollar.
Yeah.
That was a period dollar dominance had risen to a peak, and it went way down after that.
Yeah.
It only started building up when the Fed figured out what to do under Paul Volcker in the early 80s. We had really high inflation. He raised interest rates, the short-term interest rate, to almost 20%. Yeah. Can you imagine, Powell had to do that? And I worked at the Federal Reserve back then. I was a junior economist, and there were people, marching on the Fed every day, car dealers mailing in 1 million keys of cars they couldn't sell, builders sending in 2x4s for things they couldn't build. It was chaos there. Yeah. And Volcker really stood his ground, and it won't.
Okay.
But we could lose a lot of the advantage. So think of market share. Our market share rose a lot after the financial crisis, believe it or not. I would say in some ways we caused it.
Market share of global GDP.
Market share of global GDP, but market share of, for example, how much trade is in dollars, market share of how much financial instruments are in dollars. The dollar exploded. No, it didn't have to happen. Europe's not nobody in New York's going to be using the euro. But you said Latin America and Africa? Oh, believe me, they use the euro some already. They'll use it more. They'll hold it more. And the renminbi, we think of them, who wants China to know anything? There are a lot of African leaders and Latin American leaders, South Asian leaders who trust China more than the United States. Maybe they have human rights abuses or something, or a civil war going on. And it's not just Russia, it's a lot of the world. And so as our market share shrinks, and it could shrink a lot, our interest rate will go up. We'll have less security. We didn't talk about that, but the dollar dominance lets us see everything going on in the global financial system because it passes through the U.S. because we make the rules.
Yeah.
And the Chinese want to change that. So I thought that was coming without Trump. when I wrote the book, I thought if Harris won, I mean, obviously, who could expect exactly what happened? But I thought we'd get another burst of inflation the next 5 to 7 years. I thought China would continue breaking free. I thought Europe might expand its footprint. So I saw I thought dollar dominance peaked 10 years ago, not just today. When Trump entered the scene, it had actually fallen quite a bit by some of the measures I use. And he may have accelerated it a lot, but it was coming. I mean, these things don't happen overnight. They're not sudden, but we were headed in that direction.